The quiet ones always win, and it's your time to shine. The biggest shifts in a person's life never look big while they're happening. They don't come with signs, announcements, or anything that tells people to pay attention. They happen quietly. That's why the people who end up succeeding, they never looked like they were about to. They looked like they were behind. Some of them even looked like they were losing, because right before someone steals the entire show, there's always a phase where it feels like they've disappeared from it completely. And if you've been feeling that lately, there's a reason for that. You've been told your whole life that you need to be ready before anything happens, that you need more proof, more clarity, more confidence before you make a move. But that's not how this works. The people who end up taking everything you thought you needed years to reach, they didn't feel ready. They didn't have full certainty. Most of the time, they moved while things still didn't make sense. They decided before it was obvious. They trusted before it was confirmed. And that's the part most people never cross, because waiting feels safe. Waiting feels logical. Waiting feels like you're doing the right thing. But in reality, waiting is what keeps everything exactly where it is. You've probably been stacking proof without even realizing it, watching, learning, thinking, preparing, telling yourself you'll move when it clicks, when it feels clear, when you finally know. And the reason this matters right now is because you're closer to that point than you think. There's something almost predictable about how people interpret what they don't understand. When things slowed down for you, when plans didn't unfold the way they were supposed to, when you had to step back or start over, most people didn't see a phase. They saw a conclusion. From the outside, it looked like things weren't working. It looked like you had missed your moment, like you had fallen behind, like whatever you were building just didn't have enough weight to carry itself forward. And once people settle into that perception, they rarely question it again. But what they were looking at wasn't an ending. It was a process that doesn't announce what it's doing while it's doing it. Because the truth is, the version of you that could actually handle what's coming next didn't exist yet. It had to be built through those exact moments that looked like setbacks. Through the delays, through the adjustments, through the times where nothing seemed to respond the way it should. Every one of those moments forced a level of clarity, discipline, and awareness that doesn't come from things working smoothly. That's why there's always a gap between what people think is happening and what's actually happening. They were measuring visible progress. You were building something internal that doesn't show up until it's already complete. And when that gap finally closes, it doesn't look like gradual improvement. It looks sudden. It looks like everything changed overnight. But it didn't. It just reached the point where it could no longer be hidden. People call it a comeback because they never saw the construction. And once that construction is finished, the same moments they used as proof against you become the reason it all makes sense. There's a habit that doesn't get called out often because it looks like maturity on the surface, but it quietly limits everything. It's the habit of shrinking, not out of fear, but out of consideration. You learn early on to adjust yourself depending on where you are, to speak a little less, to hold back a little more, to keep your presence manageable so it doesn't disrupt the room. It feels like the right thing to do. It feels respectful, aware, even controlled. But over time, that adjustment becomes automatic. You stop expressing fully, not because you can't, but because you've trained yourself not to. You measure your words, your energy, even your ambition based on how it might be received. And without realizing it, you start living at a fraction of what you actually are. That's the habit that has to end. Because what you've been interpreting as keeping the peace has often just been you making yourself smaller so other people don't have to adjust. Your presence is not something to manage, it's something to experience. Stealing the show doesn't come from forcing attention or trying to stand out. It comes from removing the filter that's been holding you back from showing up fully. It's the moment you decide that your full expression isn't something that needs approval. And the shift that follows is subtle but undeniable. Some spaces will start to feel too tight, like they can't quite hold the version of you that's showing up now. Not because something is wrong, but because they were never built for that level of presence in the first place. The right spaces don't resist you, they expand with you. The rooms that are meant for you will never require you to become smaller to stay in them. And once you stop shrinking, you don't need to chase the spotlight anymore. It finds you naturally because there's nothing left dimming it. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Once you begin to put yourself first, the universe and everything around you will start choosing you in return. What's understood doesn't need to be explained. There's something quiet but firm about this. Putting yourself first doesn't always look dramatic. It's often small decisions, what you say yes to, what you walk away from, what you stop tolerating, but those small shifts change what you attract. And that last line, what's understood, doesn't need to be explained. That's a different level, because when something is truly aligned, you don't feel the need to convince anyone. It just makes sense. Thank you for sharing this. There's a script most people follow without ever realizing it exists. It's not written down anywhere, but you can see it in how people move, how they speak, how they hold themselves back at just the right moment. It tells you when to speak and when to stay quiet. How much of yourself is acceptable, how far you can go before it becomes too much. And most people follow it perfectly, not because they're forced to, but because it feels safer to stay within it. It keeps things predictable. It keeps reactions controlled. It keeps you in a position where you're understood, even if it means you're never fully expressed. But what's happening with you right now is different. You're starting to feel the edges of that script. You're noticing the moments where you instinctively pull back, where you filter yourself, where you adjust, not because you need to, but because you've been conditioned to. And for the first time, it's starting to feel unnecessary. That's where the shift begins, because stealing the show doesn't come from doing more. It comes from quietly stepping outside of what everyone else is still obeying. It's the moment you stop asking yourself how something will be received and start acting from a place that doesn't depend on that answer, not in a loud way, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that no longer limits itself to what's expected. The rules only work on people who still believe they have to follow them. And once that belief drops, something changes in how you move. There's less hesitation, less second-guessing, less need to calculate every outcome before taking a step. You don't force anything. You just stop holding yourself back in ways that no longer make sense. That's why it feels like you're about to cross a line, because you are. It's not a visible line, and no one's going to point it out to you. But internally, it's the difference between staying within what's been normalized and stepping into something that doesn't ask for permission to exist. There's a difference between being seen and actually being remembered, and most people never cross that line. They're noticed in the moment. People hear them, interact with them, maybe even appreciate them, but once the moment passes, so do they. There's no imprint left behind, nothing that lingers. That's how it works for most people. But something changes when your presence starts carrying weight. It's subtle at first. Conversations don't end the same way they used to. People think about what you said after you've already left. Small interactions seem to stick longer than they should. You might not even notice it directly, but it shows up in how people return to you, how they reference you, how they remember details that didn't seem important at the time. That's not random. That's what happens when your presence shifts from surface-level interaction to actual impact. Being seen is momentary, being remembered is a mark. And marks don't come from trying to impress people. They come from a level of clarity and certainty in how you show up. When you're no longer adjusting every part of yourself to fit the moment, what's left is something consistent, and consistency is what creates memory. People don't remember perfection. They remember presence. They remember how something felt. They remember the moments where something stood out without trying to. And that's what's starting to happen with you. You're not just passing through spaces anymore. You're leaving something behind, even if you're not intentionally trying to. Your words carry more weight because they're not over-explained. Your presence stands out because it's not being diluted, and the effect of that builds over time. Because once people start remembering you, everything changes. Opportunities don't come from being the loudest or the most visible, they come from being the one people can't quite forget. Influence begins the moment your absence is still felt after you're gone. And when that starts happening, you don't have to chase attention anymore. It starts circling back to you on its own. There's a reason this doesn't feel forced, and it's because you never built yourself around being seen. You weren't moving for validation, you weren't shaping yourself to get reactions, and you weren't constantly checking whether people approved of what you were doing. While others were trying to be visible, you were focused on becoming solid. And that difference matters more than people realize, because when attention is chased, it always feels slightly unstable. It depends on timing, trends, reactions, things that can shift overnight. But when attention finds you as a byproduct of who you've become, it doesn't feel like something you have to maintain. It feels like something that naturally follows. That's what's happening now. You didn't rush to be noticed, and because of that, nothing about you feels forced or overplayed. There's no sense of trying too hard, no feeling that you're performing for approval. And people can feel that immediately, even if they don't know how to explain it. Attention that is chased fades quickly. Attention that is earned stays longer than expected. That's why this shift feels different from anything you've experienced before. It's not loud, it's not overwhelming, and it's not dependent on constant effort. It's steady. It builds without you having to push it forward every second. And what makes this even more powerful is the contrast. There are people who have spent years trying to be seen, adjusting themselves, presenting versions of themselves that they think will work, chasing reactions, chasing recognition, and even when they get it, it doesn't hold. But you moved in the opposite direction. You stayed focused on what felt real, even when it didn't bring immediate results. You chose depth over visibility, consistency over quick attention. And because of that, what's coming to you now doesn't feel temporary. It feels deserved. It feels like something that was always building toward this point. The moment you stop needing to be seen is the moment you become impossible to overlook. There's a level people can imitate, and then there's a level they can't even reach. And what you've built sits in that second category. Anyone can copy surface things, the way someone speaks, the way they present themselves, the way they structure what they do. Those things can be studied, repeated, even replicated to a certain extent. And people do it all the time. But what they can't copy is what those things are built on. They can't copy the way you think. They can't copy the way you interpret situations, the way you respond without hesitation, the way you carry yourself when you're not trying to be anything at all. That comes from something deeper, something that isn't visible enough to imitate. And that's where most people get stuck. They try to replicate the outcome without understanding the foundation. They see the presence, the confidence, the impact, and they assume it's something external, something they can adopt if they just adjust a few things. But it doesn't work like that. Imitation can recreate the surface. It can never recreate the source. That's why you might have noticed this pattern before. People trying to mirror certain aspects of you, your style, your tone, your way of doing things, but it never fully lands. It feels slightly off, slightly forced, slightly incomplete. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because what they're trying to copy doesn't exist on the surface in the first place. And that's exactly what makes you stand out. You're not operating from something that can be easily replaced. You're not interchangeable. Even if someone tries to fill the same space, it doesn't carry the same weight, the same presence, the same effect. Because what people respond to isn't just what you do, it's what's behind it. The reason you can't be replaced is because what you bring isn't visible enough to replicate. And once that becomes clear, not just to others but to you, there's a level of confidence that follows naturally. You stop comparing. You stop questioning whether you're doing enough. You stop measuring yourself against things that were never built the same way. While a lot of people were focused on being seen, you were focused on becoming something that didn't need to announce itself. That difference might not have looked like much in the moment, but over time, it created a gap that can't be closed by appearances alone. There's a certain kind of energy that comes from performance. It's polished, it's visible, and it's designed to get immediate reactions. It works fast, and for a while, it can look like everything is moving in the right direction. But performance has a limit because it depends on being constantly maintained. It needs attention to survive. What you were doing was different. You were building in ways that didn't require validation to continue. You were learning things that didn't need to be shown right away. You were refining parts of yourself that nobody else had access to, and because of that, nobody could really measure what was happening. From the outside, it didn't look impressive. It didn't look like progress in the way people usually recognize it. There were no big moments, no obvious milestones, nothing that made people stop and say, "This is about to turn into something." But that's exactly why it worked. Because when growth happens in silence, it isn't shaped by expectations. It isn't rushed, it isn't distorted to fit what others want to see, and it isn't interrupted by the need to prove itself too early. It develops fully before it ever has to be presented. Anything built for attention collapses without it. Anything built in silence stands on its own. That's the difference people start to notice later, even if they don't understand it at first. What you bring doesn't feel temporary. It doesn't feel like something that appeared overnight. It feels grounded, complete, like it has been forming for much longer than anyone realized. And that's because it has. While others were focused on how things looked, you were focused on how things actually were. You were paying attention to details that don't get applause, making adjustments that don't get recognition, and building a level of depth that doesn't show itself until it's already undeniable. That's why, when everything starts to come together, it doesn't feel like you're catching up. It feels like you were always ahead, just not in a way that was visible yet. The strongest presence is the one that didn't need to announce itself while it was forming. At some point, people assumed things would continue without you the same way they always had. That whatever you brought to the table could be replaced, replicated, or simply moved past. It's a common assumption, especially when what someone contributes isn't fully understood in the moment. So things kept moving. People adjusted, roles shifted, new dynamics formed, and on the surface, everything seemed fine. Nothing completely stopped. Nothing completely fell apart. From a distance, it looked like everything was still functioning the way it should. But something was missing, not in an obvious, dramatic way. More like a subtle drop in quality, a shift in energy, a sense that things weren't landing the same way anymore. Conversations didn't carry the same weight. Outcomes didn't feel as sharp. Momentum didn't build the way it used to. And that's when the difference started to become clear. Because what you brought wasn't just visible effort. It wasn't just something people could point to and define easily. It was a combination of things: awareness, timing, presence, instinct, that shaped how everything around you worked, even when it wasn't directly acknowledged. If you're still here, still watching, I genuinely appreciate it. You don't need to rush out and prove anything after this. You don't need to suddenly become louder or force yourself into spaces that don't feel right. What's meant for you doesn't need to be chased. It responds to who you've already become. So as you move forward from here, just stay in that. Stay real with yourself, stay consistent in the way you show up, and let things unfold the way they're supposed to. Because if there's one thing you should take from this, it's that you're not waiting for your moment anymore. You're already stepping into it.